The state banquet was supposed to be one of the most controlled evenings in the royal calendar. Polished protocol, measured conversation, every detail approved, rehearsed, and signed off weeks in advance. Then Catherine looked across the table at Camilla's gown, and the entire evening changed. Because what Camilla was wearing was not simply jewelry, it was a brooch from Diana's personal collection. A piece that William had specifically said should not be worn publicly until he personally decided its place in his mother's legacy. A boundary that sources say had been communicated clearly in an internal family discussion weeks before this evening. The boundary had been crossed. In public, at a state banquet, in front of foreign dignitaries, and the full ceremonial apparatus of the British crown. Catherine did not look away. She did not smile and continue the conversation. She stood up, and in doing so she stopped a state banquet, sent a message to Camilla that no official palace statement could have delivered, and demonstrated in one quiet public moment exactly what kind of future queen the British monarchy is getting. This is what happened. Named sources, documented context, the full story. If you are new to Palace Sea Drop, subscribe now and hit the bell. We cover the royal family the way it actually happens. Every claim in this video is sourced and documented. Stay with us because this story has a layer underneath it that most coverage has missed entirely. If you have been following this channel, you already know that William has been making deliberate moves to protect and extend Diana's legacy inside the institutional structure of the monarchy he is inheriting. The duchy philanthropic redirections toward the causes Diana championed. The documented public statements about raising his children to know their grandmother as a person rather than as a public icon. The private insistence, confirmed by royal biographer Robert Jobson, who has had direct access to people close to the Prince of Wales, that Diana's memory be handled with the care and the direct input of her family. What we are about to show you is what happened when that insistence was tested in the most public setting available. Diana's personal jewelry collection is not a standard element of the royal archive. Each piece she wore publicly carried specific weight of meaning that she understood and deployed deliberately. She used jewelry as communication inside an institution that often said more through symbols than through statements. The Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara she chose repeatedly in the years when her marriage was visibly under strain. The pieces she wore in the final years of her life when she was operating increasingly outside the institutional framework of the palace. To William, these pieces are not simply valuable objects associated with his mother. They are the material record of who she was and what she stood for inside an institution that did not always allow her to stand for it openly. Royal biographer Robert Jobson, writing about William with the access that comes from years of sourced reporting, has documented that William is determined his children know Diana as a person rather than as a palace-managed legacy. He has spoken publicly about keeping her present in his family's daily life. He has been consistent in his position that his mother's memory belongs to her family to manage. That position has a practical dimension that extends to how her personal possessions are handled. Sources familiar with discussions that took place at Kensington in the weeks before the state banquet describe a family meeting at which Diana's personal pieces were discussed in the context of a future memorial tribute. During that meeting, William made his position clear. Diana's most personal pieces were not to appear in official public contexts without his direct consultation and approval. That meeting was documented in an internal household briefing according to sources familiar with its contents. When Catherine saw the brooch at the state banquet, she was not responding to a surprise. She was responding to a documented agreement being violated in public. Drop in the comments where you are watching from right now. Country or city, we want to know where the Palace Drop community is based. Drop it below and stay with us, because what Catherine did next is the detail that changes how you understand everything that followed. A state banquet is one of the most formally choreographed events in the royal calendar. A formal royal dinner held for important foreign guests on behalf of the crown, designed to project stability, dignity, and institutional strength to an international audience. Every element has been through an exhaustive approval process before the evening begins. The seating, the order of service, the jewelry worn by senior royals, all of it reviewed, all of it signed off. Catherine knew what had been approved. She had been through the same process. What she saw on Camilla's gown was not in the approved record. Sources described the moment Catherine identified the brooch as a stillness coming over her that William noticed before she said anything. The Prince of Wales looked from his wife to the jewelry and understood in the same moment. His jaw tightened according to people familiar with his expression in that instant. She sat still for approximately 30 seconds. Those 30 seconds tell you something important about how Catherine operates under pressure. She did not react immediately. She processed the situation fully before deciding to act. She assessed the cost of responding, the disruption to the evening, the public nature of the challenge, the institutional awkwardness of stopping a state banquet, and she assessed the cost of not responding. Not responding would have meant allowing Diana's personal property to be used in a public context without William's consent in front of an international audience. It would have meant the precedent was set silently. It would have meant the boundary William had stated plainly was treated as negotiable by the simple fact of having been crossed without consequence. She stood up. She asked for the service to stop. William rose a moment later, not to speak on her behalf, not to take over the situation, to stand beside her, close enough for the room to understand she was not acting alone, far enough to allow her to lead what she had started. That positioning was not accidental. Sources familiar with the dynamic between William and Catherine describe it as entirely characteristic of how they operate in difficult institutional moments. He supports without overtaking. She leads without performing. The room understood immediately that something significant had happened, even before anyone knew specifically what had caused it. Catherine addressed Camilla directly with one question that cut through every layer of protocol in that room. Why are you wearing it? The brooch had been discussed in the household briefing that followed the Kensington family meeting. According to sources familiar with that briefing, its contents were communicated to Camilla's household. William's position on Diana's personal pieces not appearing publicly without his consultation was not a private understanding known only to those in the room. It had been formally transmitted through the standard household communication process. That transmission is what makes the brooch appearing at the state banquet a documented institutional breach rather than simply a personal misstep. Camilla's response in the moment was to attempt to maintain composure. Sources describe her beginning to offer an explanation in the measured language that royal occasions demand, but her hand moved to the brooch before she spoke. That instinctive movement was seen by multiple observers at the table and noted in accounts shared with sources familiar with the evening. Charles witnessed the entire sequence. Sources describe the king's expression as one that confirmed immediate understanding of what the brooch was and why Catherine had stood up. He did not immediately intervene between the two women, and his watching rather than intervening immediately was interpreted by people familiar with the evening as a signal that he recognized the legitimacy of what Catherine was doing. The decision Charles made in the aftermath confirmed what his watching had already suggested. Within 24 hours of the state banquet, Charles issued a formal palace directive concerning the handling of Diana's personal pieces. The directive, according to sources familiar with its contents, established that no item from Diana's personal collection was to be worn at official royal events without prior direct consultation with Diana's family. The consultation requirement was explicit and formal. The directive was distributed to senior household members. It did not name the brooch incident directly, but its timing, its specific focus on Diana's collection, and the precise language of its consultation requirement left no ambiguity about what had prompted it. Camilla subsequently removed the brooch. Sources familiar with the evening describe her as privately acknowledging that wearing it without the prior consultation William had specifically requested had been a misjudgment. Catherine did not claim a victory in the aftermath. Sources describe her as emotionally drained by the decision to act rather than vindicated by it. She had known the cost of standing up, and she had stood up anyway. William spoke to Charles directly and specifically about what the incident had revealed. Not with anger, according to sources familiar with the conversation, with clarity, about what the boundary was and why it existed and what its violation in the specific public context of a state banquet had communicated to everyone who witnessed it. Charles listened. He issued the directive, and in doing so he formally codified a boundary that had previously existed as a family understanding into an institutional requirement with official standing. That is the practical documented outcome of one woman standing up at a formal dinner and refusing to look away. The palace directive that followed is not simply a response to one incident. It is an institutional acknowledgement that a category of royal property, Diana's personal collection, requires a specific protective process that did not previously exist in formal documented form. That formalization means the boundary William had been maintaining through family understanding is now maintained through institutional requirement. A family understanding can be tested by someone willing to test it. An institutional requirement generates a documented breach when violated. The protection is categorically different in its durability. Subscribe to Palace Drop right now and hit the bell. Named sources. Documented institutional context. The complete picture every week. This is what every video on this channel delivers. Subscribe now so you never miss what is coming next. For Camilla, the consequence extends beyond the specific incident into the broader narrative of her position inside the monarchy. Her rehabilitation over 20 years rested on the careful management of one central public perception, that her presence within the royal family represents a forward-looking acceptance of complicated history rather than a continued contest with Diana's legacy. The Brooch incident and the public response it generated damaged that perception in a specific way that is difficult to reverse. It suggested that her relationship with Diana's memory is active rather than respectfully distanced, that she would wear a piece of Diana's personal collection in a public context without the consent she had been asked to obtain. That suggestion, made visible in the way it was at a state banquet in front of international guests, cannot be simply managed away by subsequent careful appearances. Catherine's standing within the institution moved in the opposite direction. Sources describe the response among palace staff and senior courtiers as one of quiet but unmistakable respect for how Catherine handled the moment. She identified a breach. She assessed it fully. She acted on it decisively, but without escalation. She allowed the institutional process to take over once she had initiated it. That combination, emotional clarity, deliberate decision-making, institutional deference once the point was made, is described by sources familiar with William and Catherine's dynamic as exactly the quality William has always valued most in her. William's response was to speak to Charles directly about what the incident had revealed. The conversation was not about punishment according to sources familiar with its substance. It was about process, about ensuring what happened could not happen again. And Charles responded by making the directive official. The palace directive sits in the institutional record now as a permanent documented outcome of Catherine's decision to stand up. That record cannot be quietly removed. It exists independently of whatever personal relationships or operational dynamics change around it. And it carries Catherine's fingerprints as the person whose decision to act created the conditions that made it necessary. What Catherine did at that state banquet is worth examining beyond the specific incident because it reveals something about the future of the British monarchy that most coverage has not addressed directly. Catherine has been described throughout her public life primarily in relational terms: William's wife, the future queen, George's mother. These descriptions are accurate, but they have consistently positioned her as a supporting figure within the institutional narrative rather than as an independent actor within it. The state banquet changed that framing in a documented and public way. In one decision, Catherine demonstrated that she does not need a crown before deciding what deserves protection. She identified a boundary being crossed, assessed the full cost of the response and the full cost of non-response, and acted on the basis that Diana's legacy was worth the institutional disruption of stopping a state banquet. That is not the behavior of a supporting figure waiting for her moment to arrive. That is the behavior of someone who already understands what the institution requires and is already acting on that understanding, regardless of what title she currently holds. The public response confirmed what the palace response had already established. The emotional connection between the British public and Diana's memory has not diminished across nearly 3 decades. Catherine standing up at that banquet was read publicly as someone protecting something the country still cares about deeply. Anne, speaking privately to a senior family member according to sources, described Catherine's response as stewardship. The word was deliberate. Stewardship means protecting something valuable for a future you believe in. It is the opposite of performance. It is the opposite of drama. That quality is what the next generation of this monarchy needs more than almost any other. And Catherine demonstrated it at a state banquet on an ordinary official evening in 2026. The monarchy of 2026 is better understood for knowing that the woman who will one day be queen does not wait for permission to protect what matters. She stands up. The state banquet resumed. The evening continued. The formal courtesies were observed and completed. But the room that everyone left was categorically different from the room they had entered. Camilla left with a piece of jewelry removed, and with a documented understanding of where the boundaries now sit around Diana's personal collection. William left having watched his wife protect something that no official process had adequately protected before that evening. Catherine left having done the thing that was considerably harder than staying seated and saying nothing. Within 24 hours, the palace issued a directive that formalized the protection she had initiated. Diana spent years being told by the institution to sit down and smile and accommodate and perform the unity that everyone around her found convenient. Her son's wife stood up at a formal dinner table and refused to allow Diana's personal legacy to be treated as convenient decoration. Those two facts sit in a specific and deliberate relationship to each other, and the monarchy of 2026 is better for understanding both of them. Subscribe to Palisade Drop and hit the bell. Every week we go deeper on the stories the palace does not want mapped. The palace has a version of every story. This is the other one. Next on Palisade Drop, we are mapping the full documented picture of what Anne is gaining as Camilla loses ground. We are going even deeper inside the palace. More documents, more sources, more of the story the official version leaves out. If what you watched today gave you the full picture, what is coming next adds the layer underneath it. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you are here when it drops. You do not want to find this channel 3 months from now and have to catch up on everything you missed.